Welcome to Longform, the podcast produced by Jadalia. Our inspiration for these discussions is the well-known quote by Antonio Gramsci: "The old world is dying and the new world struggles to be born. Now is a time of monsters." I'm Mouin Rabbani, and together with my co-host, Bassam Haddad, we're exploring this theme with a series of guests whose work has provided valuable insights into these issues. For this episode, we're delighted to be speaking with Francesca Albanese, the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in the Palestinian territories occupied since 1967. Francesca Albanese, a very warm welcome to Long-Form Conversations. We're very much looking forward to this discussion.
Thank you very much, Mouin and Bassam, for having me. And given the season, Ramadan Kareem to everyone who's celebrating it.
Thank you, Francesca, and welcome again. Very delighted to speak with you and have you join us. So, Francesca, we're going to start our long form, which is, a bit longer than a shorter conversation, I guess, with just sharing with you that, as you may have gathered, the running theme for this series, at this point at least, is the broad question of whether we are experiencing a transformation or disintegration of the international order, or whether this is, business as usual. In other words, we're having challenges, including a genocide, as well as a number of challenges worldwide, not just in Palestine, from which this global order will recover and even potentially perhaps emerge even stronger. Within that context, our first question is, many people have described Israel's genocidal campaign in the Gaza Strip as the final nail in the coffin of this international order that we speak of, that was established after World War II. And the question to you is, and you can answer it however which way you like, do you agree with this assessment, and why or why not?
To an extent, yes. In the sense, it's a fatal blow right in the face of the international multilateral order that was formed, that has been forming since World War II. Because look, there is one element which you evoked, and it's transformation. Transformation is like a physical phenomenon, and it's continuous and it's never ending, and it interests the international system, international relations, international law, and certainly Palestine. What I do see is that what is happening to the international order is very serious, very dangerous, but also very transformative. And I'm not sure that everything is lost, in the sense that the order was not perfect the way it was. We have not reached this point out of the blue. It's not that all of a sudden Palestine and the Palestinians faced a sudden catastrophe. No, what is happening to the Palestinians is a tragedy foretold, and it would have not happened without the 75 years of impunity toward Israel that have preceded 2023. And so everything is exposed right now, what worked and what didn't work in the multilateral order. So, for example, I don't think that international law is problematic per se, although it has a very complex legacy, but it's our history as a humanity which has a complex legacy that is to be undone, and it's the colonial legacy. 500 years of colonialism have left a huge imprint on the international legal system, on the multilateral orders, but on pretty much everything that concerns the way knowledge is formed and shared, the way we communicate and we see the other, we look at the other. And somewhat, Palestine has triggered that transformation. because yet another genocide that the international system couldn't prevent despite we have norms in place. Yet another catastrophe, yet another war against the Palestinians, which is again unlawful because there is no war that Israel has ever waged against the Palestinians that can ever be deemed lawful. Israel has no right to wage a war, to invoke self-defense against the people it maintains under occupation. So, you know, everything is brutally under scrutiny. So it's not international law right now that is problematic. It's the capacity of international law to be enforced. So if the system doesn't serve the most vulnerable, what is the system for? It's not a democratic order, it's an oligarchy. And I think that the other positive element we are seeing right now, against all odds, is that we have a movement at the global level, which is still forming, which is still like looking for a proper sense and a proper direction, but it has formed and it's going in the direction of justice. And Palestine is somewhat right now playing the role of a unifying, rallying call that resonates with indigenous people struggling for their rights of self-determination, with gender movements advocating for gender equality, for workers' rights, for environmental justice. There is something in common across these movements, and Palestine is today the agora, the place where everything is converging. And this is where I see the source of hope.
Well, we did ask you, of course, about Gaza, and your response focused very much on Palestine. But nevertheless, I'd like to ask, what is so exceptional about this? If you compare Gaza, for example, to the 2003 US invasion and occupation of Iraq, or for that matter, numerous other illegal wars, occupations, and genocides since 1945, in the broader context of our discussion. What makes Gaza so exceptional? Can't you make many of the same observations and conclusions, for example, about Iraq?
Look, I think that the fragmentation that the Palestinians have experienced is part and parcel of the problem. It's true. I replied referring to Palestine, but not because I wanted to evade your question. It's just that I thought, and it was instinctive for me to reframe it. Gaza, as Eyal Weizman said recently, Gaza has always been a siege since the beginning.
Eyal Weizman of forensic architecture.
Yes.
Yeah.
Eyal Weizman is a professor and the founder and director of forensic architecture. And he was he's the other scholar who was cancelled together with me in Germany last week. We were about to talk about from a forensic and legal perspective.
How did that happen?
Oh, yeah. How did it happen indeed in Germany? We're talking of the Holocaust in connection with the secular colonial history of Europe, including Germany, is considered trivializing the genocide of the Jews. But however, let's leave it for another for another question or for another discussion. Now, Palestine should be looked at in its entirety. It's still the question of Palestine. So yes, while Gaza has always been considered like exceptional and separated and part and parcel of the fragmentation that has been imposed on the Palestinian people, what is happening to Gaza is exceptional in its brutality, but it's not exceptional if you look at things, at developments from a Palestinian people perspective. Because Gaza is, what has happened to Gaza and the people in Gaza in the past 16 months is I agree with the historian Ras Segal. Is a textbook case of genocide. It's really showing what settler colonial genocide is about, where the destruction of a group as such is pursued in an attempt to control the land, to control the resources, and probably, actually without probably, the finality here and one of the aims is to accelerate the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. But what is unique is how this genocide has been enabled, has been how this crime has been committed, how it has been justified. At the time, it was televised. So it's the first televised genocide of human history. It has been told by its very victims, including Palestinian journalists who have been killed in the hundreds. And we have seen the destruction of the people, the systematic destruction of the people, home by home, church, mosque by church and mosque, university by university, hospital. So life has been completely leveled, the possibility to have a collective life, because this is the life that is destroyed, that is targeted and destroyed in connection with the genocide. Genocide as a crime is the destruction, the intentional destruction of a group as such, or the intention to destroy a group as such. And the Palestinians in Gaza have been targeted as such. It's not just Hamas. Everyone was Hamas, everyone was killable, destroyable. But what's interesting is also how Israel has camouflaged its genocide by justifying its actions in terms of eradicating the enemy, whatever it was, executing evacuation orders necessary to advance military activity, saying that the occupation was disposing of safe zones, humanitarian corridors, and all this has been used, in fact, to distract from the level of death that has been brought upon the Palestinians through bombs, sniper fire, famine, starvation, or lack of medical care, because everything has been destroyed. So yes, while Gaza is somewhat exceptional in the absurd brutality that has been unleashed against the people, it's not unique, because this is why I say we need to look at the totality of Israel's crimes against the totality of the Palestinian people as such, in the totality of the land that Israel has targeted for expansion of Greater Israel, taking the land without the Palestinian people for a number of reasons. And this is happening, and it's not happening just in Gaza, where now that Gaza is destroyed, people are saying, yeah, but come on, I mean, how can Gaza be reconstructed while the people are still there? Well, why don't you ask the Palestinians? Why don't we start talking about who's going to pay the reparations for Gaza? Because this is what international law is there for. Now, Israel, the United States, and Germany, those who have really enabled this genocide, and not just Israel, but those who have provided military, financial, and political supports, need to pay for reparations. And there should be pressure on the international community. But meanwhile, look at what is happening in the West Bank. Is it that different? Already in October last year, I was warning the international community, the General Assembly, that the genocidal violence was leaking out into the West Bank. And I was using the case of arbitrary arrest and detention and torture of thousands of Palestinians, regardless of their political affiliation. I was using the other case of the arbitrary and extrajudicial killings of Palestinians. They had been killed, 600 Palestinians had been killed in the West Bank between October 2023 and October 2024, and also the destruction of hospital and medical infrastructure. And now, instead of decreasing, the violence against the Palestinians in the West Bank has escalated in the past month and a half. So under the pretense or the pretext of a ceasefire, Israel has intensified its attack on the Palestinians. Why? In order to forcibly displace them. So this is why I say, yes, we can talk about Gaza, but we should not miss what is happening to the Palestinians as a whole. Because if we take a step back and look at the full picture, and we see the totality of Israel's conduct against the totality of the Palestinians as such, in the totality of the land that Israel claims for itself, we will understand the true nature of this genocide.
So you've made the point that Gaza is not exceptional in the Palestinian context, but that then leaves it another question unanswered. Is Palestine exceptional? You know, if you compare it to Iraq, if you compare it to the former Yugoslavia, for example, if you compare it to any number of Sudan, Vietnam, what is there? Is Palestine exceptional in the challenges that it is posing to the very basic norms of international conduct?
I would say no, it's not exceptional, and still it is exceptional. So let me elaborate upon that. Why, for me, the comparison with Iraq is not necessarily relevant and still is important, is that while the US attack on against Iraq was preposterous and so upheld by lies, and there has never been accountability for that, still was an aggression from a state against another state. So while it was unlawful, it was an unlawful war, it was an aggression, it was an invasion. Here the situation is different from a legal status of the land point of view. And it's even more serious and even more tragic because the Palestinians are still deprived of the possibility to enjoy self-determination in the form of an independent statehood, because the Palestinians remain under Israel military rule, under Israeli occupation. Gaza was under siege, which is a collective punishment. It's a war crime under the Geneva Convention. The West Bank was eaten up inch by inch, pieces of land by pieces of land, and home by home, school by school. So there was a different speed at which the Palestinians were being fought against by Israel, but it was the Palestinian people who was standing against this aggressive and very rapacious occupation, which now we know it's unlawful because it amounts to annexation and it amounts to racial segregation and apartheid according to the International Court of Justice. So you see the difference. And at the same time, where I see the proximity between the case of Iraq and the case of Palestine is that they are two different points in the arc, or on the arc of history, in terms of the transformation element that we were discussing at the beginning, also in the trajectory of dismantlement of the international multilateral order. So whether we can debate or not whether what is happening to Gaza is one of the last nails in the coffin of the international multilateral order, I'm definitely sure that the aggression against Iraq and what has ensued is one of the first nails in the coffin in the, let's say, post-Cold War era. And since then, the acceleration of the dismantlement of the order, of the international order as we had known it until then, has accelerated. there is another element, and this is the conclusive one that I wanted to make. Is Palestine an exception? To an extent, yes. Israel, it's not Palestine which is an exception. Palestinians are being treated as other let me say quote unquote, because this is not what I think and how I see the Palestinians. But the Palestinians are still treated as colonial subjects. You see the discussion right now that is happening regarding the reconstruction of Gaza. Sometimes it happens, even member states, even Arab states have these discussions without making sure that there are the Palestinians around the table. Then, of course, there is the question of representation, who represents the Palestinians. But for me, the starting point is that this is to be the moment where there is no compromise around the fact that Palestinians have the right of self-determination and they have to be let free to decide by themselves. So what is the obligation of the international community under international law is to make sure that Israel takes the military presence, the settlements, and the control of natural resources, space, and borders back to its territory. It cannot continue to use any form of influence, direct, indirect, material or immaterial, tangible, intangible, outside the green line or the blue line, I mean, whatever is the territory that it has already taken to the Palestinians. And again, this doesn't infringe upon the right to return of the refugees. This is another issue. But the state of Israel cannot continue to behave as an unlawful occupier. And this is the thing. Israel has always lived and thrived as a state of exception, treating the Palestinians as colonial subjects in the era where colonialism had been banned from the international system. We are not in the 18th century or, we are in 2025. And so there are certain rules, and the rules have always been violated more brutally than in other situations because of the state of exception that is granted, or the status of exception that is granted to Israel.
Thanks, Francesca. I would like to move to another realm, which is related, of course, and it has to do with the fact that your field is international law, of course, and your mandate as a UN special rapporteur is to monitor and advocate for human rights. So our question is, how would you respond to those who have concluded that international law and human rights have been rendered meaningless? And how would you respond to those who additionally claim that the UN itself has been rendered ineffective beyond the point of redemption? I mean, it is not a completely new observation or critique of the UN, but today, after the events of the past year and a half or so, it's many are arguing it's been rendered almost completely. It's very difficult to redeem anymore.
So first of all, I do not disagree with any of the arguments that are made and that you shared. I do agree that international law has been made ineffective. But this, again, as I was saying before, international law has never served really the Palestinians. It has always been neglected at best or violated, flagrantly violated at worst, and in the case of Palestine. So I cannot think of once until now where justice, an inch of justice, has been served to the Palestinians. And again, I'm not saying that to make a political argument. I've studied and I've been engaged for over a decade before becoming a special rapporteur with the question of Palestine, studying the Palestinian refugees, the question of Palestinian refugees. So what has happened to Palestine from the perspective of its human victims. This is why I say Palestinians are all Nakba survivors, you know. So in a way, it's incredible how the Palestinians have remained committed with international law, but not with this starry-eyed attitude. They know the limits of international law. They know the limits of the international order, but they've used it also in a way that has proven and it has exposed the hypocrisy of the system, the double standards. And again, we can debate the issue as if it was just a philosophical undertaking. But I'm 100% convinced that if we abandon for a second our posture of contemporaries and you know, just a speck of dust in the arc of history, if we take a step back and see at all what has happened to Palestine, while it's true that this is the most tragic moment in terms of loss of life, this is also the most transformative moment for Palestine because it's a global issue. Mouin, you might remember, because I always, this is, I've never shared this before, but because Mouin is here, Mouin and I have engaged on the question of Palestine for a while, including as colleagues, as part of the global network on the question of Palestine. And it was 2018 or 2019 where we were saying that there was a problem of narrative and Palestine was so poorly, for lack of better words, branded. In the sense, it was considered a niche issue at best among legal scholars, among other scholars. It was always treated as a complex issue, impossible to engage with. And all of a sudden, it has become, as I was saying before, a rallying cry for justice for many across different struggles. So everything is making sense, including what, I mean, I now understand, for example, what our common friends and sister and comrade, in my case, Noura Erekat, was saying, building on this intersectionality of different movements. This is something that the Palestinians have always seen, and now it can be seen to so many. So yes, while it's a desperate moment and it's very dark, I also see a sparkle of light. I also see the cracks on the wall. And if we see light through the cracks, it means that the cracks are getting bigger and bigger. And this leads me to the second part of your question, the United Nations system. Look, for me, the United Nations has a meaning if it protects the people. It's clear that the political system is now oriented toward more of an oligarchism than real democracies. This is what I see as a citizen of a liberal democracy, as someone who was born and raised with a concept of a welfare state. Well, it doesn't exist anymore. This was an opportunity that has been missed, that has been betrayed. What we have now is a real struggle for access to rights and freedoms for everyone. So I do take this as an opportunity to say the United Nations, who have been completely paralyzed and fragmented over the past 16 months, have an opportunity to build on the goodwill of those member states, because there are. We tend to look at the US and the West and center the discourse, the criticism, and the narrative on them. But this is also a sort of a part of the problem, and our colonized, I'm not saying yours, I'm saying a colonized mindset. No, look at what is happening in the global south. Look at the states who are cutting ties with Israel, who are reconsidering the trade agreements, who are not purchasing military services from Israel anymore, who are declaring an arms embargo, no more harbor, commitment to investigate and prosecute criminals, those who have committed crimes in the occupied Palestinian territory. So again, I see challenges, but I also see the opportunities. And the United Nations has an opportunity to regenerate itself, but either it does it in a way that is protective of the people, all people, or it will lose its purpose, and so its ends, really.
Can I, on this same topic, can I ask you about your own work for the United Nations? Of course, you've now been special rapporteur on the situation of human rights in the territories occupied by Israel in 1967 for several years. And one of your main responsibilities in that function is to produce periodic reports on specific topics. I think every 6 months, if I'm not mistaken. And you've produced reports, I think, on the rights of children, on Israel's carceral regime, and so on. Your most recent report looked at the topic of genocide as colonial erasure. And I think you, as part of that report or before it, have made the claim that genocide is intrinsic to colonialism, that it's the logical culmination of colonialism, if I'm quoting you correctly. Could you tell us about that report, and specifically about your view that genocide and colonialism are ultimately inseparable phenomena?
Yes. So first of all, yeah, you are correct. The role of a special rapporteur is that of documenting and monitoring violations of human rights, either on a given topic, the right to food, the right to health, etc., or on given countries or territories. So yeah, my main responsibility is to produce reports every 6 months for the Human Rights Council and the General Assembly and make recommendations. So what I've tried to do is to really provide a broader picture for people to understand how systemic violations are for the Palestinians. And, you know, if I read my reports right now in retrospect, it all makes sense. I could have seen this genocide coming had I been more knowledgeable and less ignorant about settler colonialism. Because while people in the global south instinctively understand what colonialism is, I don't. Europeans don't. And again, it takes humility to accept our own limitations. It takes humility to recognize our own ignorance. But for me, this is part and parcel of the healing process that we embark on as humanity, as societies that are part of the same family, you know. And so the reason why I'm saying that is that in the mid-October 2023, I was very, very fast in coming out by saying what has proven true, that Israel's intention was to ethnically cleanse Gaza. Really, I think it was the 14th of October, said, look, as a scholar of Palestinian forced displacement, I can tell you, forced displacement is what Palestinians have experienced for 100 years. Fast pace, low pace, intensity might vary, but Israel here is taking the opportunity of a war, under the fog of war, to forcibly displace millions of Palestinians. It has done it in 1947-49, it has done it in 1967. And the full destruction that was unleashed against not just military objective, but against the schools, mosques, churches, bakeries, agricultural land. And again, this was the creation of conditions of life, as I would come to realize. And while I was fast at jumping on the ethnic cleansing framework, which is not a legal concept anyway, I had other special rapporteurs who were saying, Francesca, this is genocide. This risks to be genocide. And I was saying, no, how can it be genocide? Because again, I had a very superficial understanding of genocide, which until then had been quite a niche legal quite a niche in legal studies and others. And then my colleagues told me, oh my God, people really from your part of the world wouldn't understand, wouldn't recognize genocide, even if it hit them in the face like a train. And this is where I started studying, and it has taken not long. I mean, I've reread Shabbas, but especially Lemkin. When I read Lemkin,
And
the
Lemkin
Jewish
is, of
scholar
course,
who
the
coined
scholar
the
who first coined the term genocide.
exactly. He coined the term genocide, and he's been behind the codification of genocide as a crime. And when you read Lemkin, you understand that the genocide he had in mind was the destruction of peoples that had taken place in the context of settler colonialism. And this is why I was saying I could have realized what was coming throughout my reports, because in the self-determination report it was my first report in 2022, I said the right of self-determination is the destruction of a people. Sorry. I said here, yeah. I said the right of self-determination is the right of a people to exist as a people and to determine themselves culturally, economically, religiously, in a given territory. And this is being eroded in the case of Palestine because of the rapacious, acquisitive, and annexationist occupation that Israel maintains. And then the way Israel has transformed life for generations of Palestinian children, which by using an expression coined by a Palestinian scholar, Professor Nadra Shahub Kevorkian, is a very unchilding experience. Palestinians under Israeli occupation are deprived of the lightful experience that childhood is. And also you can see that a system that in genocide jurisprudence, in genocidal literature, genocide-related literature, you can see that attacks on children are precursors or indicators of genocidal mindset. So going back to what I described in two reports, Anatomy of a Genocide, Genocide as Colonial Erasures, the two reports I produced in 2024, I can tell you, what I've documented is genocide as the denial of the right of a people to exist as a people in a given land, and it has different modes of elimination. There is the physical elimination, the disintegration of the political dimension or institutions, culture, language, national sentiments. And this is a process, not an act. And the process has some elements that are called in the literature, in the genocide literature, they are called stages, the 10 stages of genocide. For example, mass killing, arbitrary extrajudicial killings, or segregation, or the brutalization of the other, the arbitrary arrest and detention and torture against the people as such. These are precursors. These can be precursors, and these are very recurrent in settler colonialism. This is why I say it's like if genocide as a crime was the dormant gene of settler colonial experience. It might not turn out into full genocide, in full destruction of a people at the intensity and speed we are seeing in Gaza. It might take centuries. It might encapsulate several genocides, as it has happened, for example, to the Native Americans. Yet again, another Palestinian scholar who has tried to enlighten the similarities between Native Americans and the case of Palestine, Steve Salaita. You know, this now, for me, this all makes sense. But it was not as clear as it is today, because now I see how Palestine has exposed as what a settler colonial genocide is, meaning a crime which is perpetrated, meaning the crime is the intentional destruction of a people, in order to achieve an objective, which is taking the land without the people.
Francesca, I would like to ask you something about your own work before we move to other questions and follow up on my earlier question on international law and the UN. Based on your very, organic presence at the UN, can you tell us a little bit about how these conversations are playing out within the UN and within the circles you're working with at the level of personnel, people, and those who have devoted, a lot of time and sometimes or many times their lives to, to basically addressing the importance of human rights and international law and so on, despite all of our cynicism, because where we come from in terms of, our orientation is such that we don't see the outcome that we are observing in the world today or last year or 10 years ago or 40 years ago. We don't see it as a reflection of an international law and the human rights principles that are actually working for everyone. So how do people who are doing the work see this? And can you just give us like a clue? Can we like sort of go in to the sort of level of personnel if you are able to address this? Because I know that sometimes it gets dicey.
Sorry, sometimes that this
it gets dicey, like there are some like private or sensitive things that you might not want to address or talk about, because it's really about how people that you work with see what's happening and see the degradation. I would say the further degradation of the significance and impact of international law and human rights.
Yeah. No, I think this is probably the most. It has been the most revelatory moment in my experience with the UN, but I do share this with others. And there is, again, I cannot speak on behalf of the UN, but let me share my impressions. So the UN, first of all, it's important to understand that it's a very composite entity. Sorry, guys, just a second. I need to close the door. Okay, the United Nations is a composite entity. So it's made of bodies like the UN Security Council, the General Assembly, the Human Rights Council, and these are the venues and the platforms where member states meet and discuss, etc. And then there is the bureaucracy. UN officials, civil servants, international civil servants, as it was in my previous incarnation, serving member states in their various fora. And then there are UN programs, agencies, and offices, like the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, UNDP, or UNRWA. I mean, still with us, I'm not sure for how long. But so, and then there is the international legal and justice system. There is the International Court of Justice, which is very, very important in order to interpret international law and in order to solve controversies among states. So this is, in a very simple way, what the UN is. And so I do not think that it's possible to say that everything in the United Nations has failed. The United Nations as an organization has not served everyone equally, everyone fairly. I think that historically, Western states are the ones who have benefited the most from the peace and security, which is one of the pillars of the UN Charter. However, it would be unfair not to recognize how much the system has changed, thanks to people from what we call, for lack of better word, from the global south. It would be unfair not to recognize that international law is, from being a tool that has been used to colonize, to dominate people from Africa to Asia to Latin America, has changed thanks also to the impulse, the democratizing impulse that has come from the very enlargement of the General Assembly. When the organization was created, there were 53 member states. Now there are 193, and it's thanks to the work of the global south that we have had incredible developments, like the positive codification of the right of self-determination, the recognition of the right to resist as part of international law. And again, the human rights system that I was evoking before, all the struggles that have been conducted by human beings like you and I, and for the recognition of women's rights, workers' rights. And again, I think it's very important to recognize that we would probably still have like people of African descent exhibited in zoos if it was not also for the civil and rights movement that has made this prohibited and brutal and recognized as a brutal and racist practice. It's one of the most inhumane things that we've had in Europe in the past decades, you know. And so the world was racist, and as always, I mean, racism is still the disease, the social disease we are dealing with, and it's becoming more and more visible. So, having said that, I think that October 2023 has pushed us into an uncharted territory. Politically, socially, everything is being rewritten and decided. We are not operating according to a script. I mean, for me, it's easier because I really use international law as a compass. But because I think that international law can be a useful compass when held with integrity, when held in ethical hands, I would say. In the UN, I sense that there is much dissatisfaction and disgruntlement among member states, among civil servants, and others. So Palestine has really changed a lot in the way the system looks at itself. But of course, in order to have changes, visible changes, there is a time that is always necessary. I mean, everything, we are moving also because of the way we communicate. We think that everything can be changed with a remote control, or just, you know, scrolling up and down, moving fast forward. Or it doesn't work this way. We are still a human family which moves very slowly. And now it's taking time to understand how transformative this moment is. But it's pushing the United Nations to confront itself and its limitations. So I'm someone who thinks that it's better to preserve the system for what it has to offer to all of us in terms of protection, in the sense is a platform where we can discuss all together, trying to look at each other equally, but recognizing that it's not true. Member states are not equal. So this must be the moment to explore, to interrogate Orientalism and double standards, and embrace as a way forward an opportunity of having international relations premised upon true, equal, and fair nation-to-nation recognitions, instead on what has been the rule until now, might makes right.
The law of the jungle. And
Well, but
on this,
I oppose this because I've been living in a place where the jungle was an essential element in the country, and the jungle has rules. The jungle has rules and balances and hierarchies, and our society doesn't. Our society is renouncing all rules to embrace consciously lawlessness. So it's much worse than the jungle.
and on that note, and returning to a point you made earlier in this discussion, um, in Gaza today, but certainly not only in Gaza, impunity reigns supreme and accountability is non-existent. Is it realistic to expect that this can be changed, that this can be overcome, and if so, how?
I often say that we need justice in its most comprehensive form in Palestine. And because Palestine so far has been complete, absolute, protracted denial of justice, I think that correcting this will be a sort of, allow me to use this term, will have something redemptive for the international community. So I'm trying to show the bright side of it because I think it can still happen. Palestine offers us legally an opportunity to enforce the law as it has never happened, to enforce the law, and this needs to start at the domestic level. Because at the international level, we know what are the power, what is the power structure and the power balance. So, and imbalances. So we need to start at the domestic level as much as we can in places where there is a democratic order, where there is at least a pretense or a structure of accountability. And whomever has participated, has enabled, has aided and assisted this genocide or whatever crimes people want to call what has happened in Gaza and the rest of the occupied Palestinian territory is to be held accountable, starting with public officials, with political leaders. And by the way, this is already happening in the sense there are a number of countries where civil society organization is taking governments to court for their participation to the Israeli crimes because of providing
Weapons
weapons.
deliveries and so on.
Excuse me?
Weapons deliveries and so on are being challenged in
Yes, and
court.
it's happening in the Netherlands, in Denmark, and in the UK. And hopefully, I mean, I know that proceedings are being considered in other countries. This is one. You know, I'm investigating at the moment the complicity of the private sector. And again, this was uncharted territory for me. I had no idea of how deep, extensive, and pervasive is the complicity of private actors. Not just the military and surveillance systems, because this is quite obvious, right? It's quite intuitive. But think of, and not even businesses investing in settlements, even this is intuitive. But think of charities, pension funds, banks, supply chain, and there is an entire matrix, an entire like architecture and infrastructure of complicity of businesses, of individuals, including universities, research centers. It's impressive. So there should be accountability against these people. And this must start at the domestic level, but also think of the citizens with double nationality, the Israelis who have, for example, Australian, Italian, American, British, or other nationalities that have allowed them to fight in the army. This is in the Israeli army. So chances are, if they have been fighting in Gaza, they have been partaking in crimes. They have to be vetted. They have to be held accountable. So you see, this is the opportunity to test the real function of international justice and universal jurisdiction, which is complementarity. While it's extremely positive that the International Court of Justice has moved and has done what it could, considering the limitations, considering the political establishment, considering how conservative is the International Court of Justice. An international criminal court, of course it's very late, of course it's very little, and at the same time, anyone who has been working closely on the ICC knows that the arrest warrants that have been issued against Netanyahu and Gallant, Prime Minister and the former Defense Minister of Israel, respectively, could have never been envisaged 2 years ago, for example. So there is the justice system is in motion, and this is something that is to be sustained and continued. But this is not the only positive note. Look at what is happening at the international level. Again, there are member states who are speaking so loudly against the double standards that have dominated the question of Palestine. And it's not that they couldn't do that before. They've done it before and they are doing that now. Of course, there is a counter push. Of course, the pro-Israel lobby, the Christian Zionists are doing everything they can to continue to maneuver politics and politicians to control domestic affairs so that it continues to serve Israel. But now it's exposed. It cannot be hidden anymore. And the more it's known, the more it triggers reaction. And this is the third layer, the people. Here's the opportunity. The UN Charter eventually talks about we, the people. It's upon us to make sure that the rights enshrined in the international human rights system and what is enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the UN Charter, first and foremost, does not remain like dead letter, and it goes back to square zero. Accountability must be pursued to the largest possible extent in courts and beyond courts. And this is why it's so important to continue to have mobilization, even when it comes at a great risk. And I know, because I'm one of those who have taken risks for herself and her family. And I'm not saying that because I want people to be compassionate with me, simply because if an ordinary person like me has done it, others can do that. And this, while for me, it's more out of humanity and really huge sense of responsibility and commitment out of the mandate that the United Nations have conferred upon me, I think that there are others who have responsibilities, real responsibilities, like journalists and constitutional lawyers, first and foremost, and academics. I mean, scholars cannot continue to teach human rights and to write human rights books and then not stand in solidarity with their students when they are punished, reprimanded, penalized for simply seeking the application of basic principles of human rights. So there is a movement out there. We need to see the good part of it and trying to build on it, capitalize on it, and really decolonize, breaking the silos we operate in so as to make this moment not just transformative, but revolutionary. Make sense?
Very much so.
Good.
Absolutely, Francesca. There's so much to discuss, but we're also running up against our 90 minutes. So let me ask you this question. It doesn't have to be the last question, because we always say it's going to be the last question and then a few things emerge. But the controversy and the news and the reports that we have been hearing regarding your own work.
Guys, please
Don't worry. We are not gonna panic. No We're not panicking.
No, I was talking to my family.
Oh, I see. So I thought,
My God, a real
عادي.
Italian family.
Well, Italian, Lebanese, Palestinian, it's all the same. Uh, so,
Yeah,
uh,
totally.
so since assuming your post, even before, the more recent, escalation, you've been subjected to an orchestrated campaign of abuse and vilification that so many of us, unfortunately, have had to, observe, and very, very sorry about what you have gone through. How would you characterize the agenda behind these types of campaigns? And how do you want to respond to it, as it probably will continue?
Yeah, look, I've always said that I'm not particularly surprised of the allegations, the spurious allegations against me. I mean, because this is what is said about everyone who engages with the question of Palestine and who scrutinizes Israel. Israel is a member state of the United Nations, and there is no reason not to hold it to the regular, ordinary standards that are part of the international system. Israel unlawfully occupies what remains of the homeland of another people, the Palestinians. The Palestinians have made a huge compromise, accepting to limit their right to self-determinations in the form of independent and exclusive statehood in what remains of historical Palestine. And again, this huge compromise is being really abused, betrayed by the continuous annexation of that territory. So this is the reality. And Israel has been not just an unlawful occupier, has also committed the crime of apartheid and other crimes. The list is very long. Forced displacement, deportation, torture. It's starvation. The list is huge, but eventually the point is that I'm not asking to, as a UN mandate holder, I'm not asking Israel to be treated exceptionally. Rather the contrary. I think that Israel should be treated as a normal state instead of reacting using extra sensitivity and victimhood, as it always done. But look, I think that what has happened in the past 16 months has exposed the fragility of the attacks against everyone who asks Israel to abide by international law. Everyone has been accused of anti-Semitism. Everyone has been accused to support terrorism. It's very heavy psychologically. I wouldn't say no. But the thing is that for me, for example, I mean, I've developed such a nerve to deal with it. I ignore what is said. I know what I have to do. I don't let others define who I am. I know what I'm doing. I know international law. I know human rights. I know I can distinguish justice versus injustice, which doesn't mean that there is always not something new that can be learned. But what I find really disconcerting recently was the extent to which people can go to defend Israel. And what has been quite unexpected, I wouldn't hide, quite traumatic, has been my experience in Germany, which is quite extreme. Because again, I want to underscore, while the pro-Israel lobby is very well equipped, very well resourced, I don't think that there are many, but they're very, very vocal and very well organized. So wherever I have been, there has been a campaign preceding my arrival against me. And I've always said, trying to have events cancelled, meetings with public officials cancelled. So my reputation has been tainted, but I don't think it's even that the case. The case is to make sure that my message was not heard. And what has happened to me happens to everyone. So I was saying, look at what happens to me. If it happens to me, imagine what happens to scholars, students, journalists, and others. This censorship triggering then self-censorship is typical of places where you have institutionalized bullying and mafia-style techniques allowed to fester. This is the reality. But again, it has never succeeded in Canada, in Australia, in everywhere I've been, in the UK, in France, in Spain, wherever I've been, despite the allegations and the attacks, I've had meetings with government officials, parliamentarians, journalists. Actually, the attacks have been turned into, yet an opportunity to talk about Palestine.
And the accusations
particularly
are no
serious.
longer taken seriously, I think. Maybe 5 years ago, when someone faces these accusations that are leveled against you, they would immediately assume, there's no smoke without fire.
Yes.
Now, I think
Yes.
people have heard these same accusations made about with increasing absurdity, that they no longer take them seriously for the most part.
Yes. Yeah.
And
Indeed.
let me, as you address this, the idea that these are not being taken or no longer are taken as seriously. Can you also tell us at some point how does it affect you personally, if you'd like to talk about this? Because as empty as these accusations have become, and we are all used to them, like so much so, I mean, in the United States, but definitely everywhere, especially in Europe, Western Europe. Nonetheless, these accusations, are things that disrupt our day, and it could very well be that this is one of the reasons why this is being done, because it affects the personal. So if you can address that, if possible, because you look like you are able to brush things off you seem like you're able to brush things off, and you keep going like a train, which is why you are so respected and admired. But if you can tell us like its effect on you personally, I mean, how do you deal with it?
No, it doesn't. Seriously. In the beginning, yes. The first time there was this campaign against me, or as an anti-Semite, it was very, very painful, because my entire life has been seriously about also profound awareness of what Italians had done to the Jewish people. And so I grew up in a country which didn't, I mean, again, it's not about sense of guilt. I think that sense of guilt is a very dangerous concept. It's sense of shame. I grew up with a sense of shame for what we had done. And this is the family who raised me, the readings which became formative in my upbringing, like Primo Levi. I've read everything that Primo Levi has written, and it's really a pillar of the conscience and consciousness I have today as a woman, as a mother, as a human rights lawyer, of course. And so being told you are an anti-Semite, I mean, I've been questioning, oh my God, is there something I'm not seeing? And then this is when, the incredible thing is that this is when it's Jewish people, including Israelis, who have come to my side, have been to my side, saying, stay calm, consider the facts, consider that this is used as a way to distract, to deflect the attention from what you are saying, from what you are doing. So try not to be affected. Try to understand that this is a way to deplete you, to make you ineffective. If you can survive with this will make you stronger. And somewhat I have metabolized this. And this is why I've also been very close to the Jewish scholars from Israel and around the world who have been strongly advocating against the weaponization of anti-Semitism, against the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, which conflates real anti-Semitism, which is discrimination and racism against Jewish people because of them being Jewish, with the new anti-Semitism, which is criticism of the state of Israel, can be considered anti-Semitic. So again, this is why I draw my sense of command and drive from what we have to do. And here it's about people's life. It's not about the philosophical entertainment that the question might have. There are people who really lose their jobs and lose their scholarship, who lose their friends and family ties. It's happening to so many Jewish people who are being completely ostracized in their community because of their stance in solidarity with the Palestinians. I mean, there is all this is just to say what happens to me is not exceptional. So why should I make a big fuss out of it? Also, I have a positionality. I have a UN mandate. I have immunities for what I do in the exercise of my functions. So I am somewhat protected. What's the advantage of bringing my ego into this? Which, of course, I resent being, being treated like disrespect. But eventually, it's not about. It's about what we have to do. And so I'm honest. It doesn't touch me anymore. I'm very strong. I've been suffering a lot last year, but not because of the campaigns against me. I don't care. I've been suffering because of the testimonies, because of the evidence I had to consider, because of the sense of fatigue for seeing the bodies of children spread like, over walls of schools and buildings and homes, and mothers crying in front of the incineration of their offsprings. This is something that has scarred me in a way that I would not expect it. But again, all of us have coping mechanisms. I keep it together. I have and this is the other thing, the outpour of love and support and solidarity that I have received is much stronger than these four idiots, who accuse me or others. We are fighting a fundamental fight. We are part of an existential struggle. For me, justice is an existential struggle. And I'm glad, I'm proud to be part of it. And I will keep on being part of this because we are so many. We are so many already part of it. You see me, but there is an entire movement of scholars, journalists, ordinary citizens, workers, students. We just need to break the silos. We need to make the effort of uniting and accepting that, yes, we have to renounce, we have to make some sacrifices. We need to become more essential in the way we live and we relate to one another. But this is also part of the transformative moment we are in.
Okay, before you jump in, Mouin, I saw you take a breather and ready to launch, if you don't mind.
Please.
Francesca, have you, historically, when one looks at, let's say, the Holocaust, or what happened in what the U.S. did in Cambodia, or Vietnam, or Iraq, for that matter, when you look at what China has done itself, or Russia, historically and today. So I'm not just trying to say, it's only Western countries, or what the British, have done. And you look at how the attacks and the aggression vis-a-vis a group of people takes place, and then the punishment of this group of people for resisting or for responding. Have you witnessed at the UN and in your career, any other case where not only the victims of the perpetrators are punished, but also their supporters are often punished? I mean, we're talking about people outside the zone of conflict for the most part. Have you seen a case where the people who support the social justice principles of the victims being punished in the same way in other cases? Have you seen anything like this? Because it's very interesting if you look historically. It seems that, especially in places like Western Europe, Germany, and the United States, in particular, in terms of North America and Western Europe, the supporters of the very legitimate cause of Palestine and Palestinians are themselves severely punished as if they are the problem, right? Have you seen anything like this?
Look, honestly, no, not in my lifetime. But because in my lifetime, I've never seen something like this. I've not seen an assault against a besieged population of this dimension. I mean, when I saw what Israel was unleashing against the people of Gaza, my mind went to another thing that I've seen in my life, but from afar and without having the testimonies on a real time on our phones, which is the attack on the Tamils, the Tamil tigers in Sri Lanka. The government to deal with the Tamil tigers encircled the area and completely raided it and committed crimes against civilians. I mean, there have been
You mean the
inquiries
final
and
offensive by the Sri Lankan military?
yes. So yeah, it was in the name of counterterrorism. It was in the name of security. It was whatever it was the justification. Now, without expressing any opinion on the facts themselves, there were innocent civilians who were killed, properties destroyed. So somewhat this idea of besieging a population, but what has been happening here has been particularly repugnant because of the dimension, because of the scale, because of the weaponry used, because of the images we were receiving, because of the denialism of Israeli leaders, because of the camouflage in their language. They were calling safe corridors, or safe areas, places that were just death zones. They were saying, oh, we have issued evacuation orders. But do you imagine what the heck is it, that evacuation order sent on an A4 document that says you have 24 hours to leave the place, otherwise you will be considered a Hamas associate and therefore targeted. And this has been, and without electricity, so some would receive this leaflet, others don't, without the possibility to communicating inside the northern Gaza Strip when they received the evacuation order. So 1.1 million people were ordered to leave, including hospitals, including elderly, including pregnant women, including people with disability. And Israel ran away with this evacuation order. I've been asked over and over by idiots, really, because sometimes people are just idiots. Because you need to be not just illiterate about the history, but really retarded in order not to understand that when you order 1.1 million people to evacuate, there is something complete in 24 hours, there is something completely wrong. And so I've been asked over and over, oh, but Israel gave evacuation orders. Don't you think that this is enough of a measure to prevent that? No, I don't think it's a measure to prevent that. And while this was happening, Western countries in particular have been used these arguments to shield Israel from accountability, to shield Israel from scrutiny. This has been extremely painful last year, you know. And while, sorry, I lost the.
Well,
what was the question?
while you remember what you were going to say, it's this absolutely bizarre combination of, on the one hand, total denial of what's happening.
Oh yeah.
Pallywood, Gazawood, whatever, obesity epidemic, and all this nonsense, and at the same time, exuberantly celebrating every Palestinian death. It's kind
no,
of
and this is the thing now.
happening,
So while
not
there is
happening,
nothing
but
in
great,
my
it's happening.
there is nothing in my life experience that is as brutal as that. I think that this is a very important question, Bassam, but we should have it. We should debate it with historians, with people, with indigenous scholars who have studied their history from a decoloniality perspective. Because I know, for example, that in the United States of America, it took centuries to genocide the Native Americans, and it happens in so many ways. I'm reading a book right now, the discovering of Americas, and it talks about there's so many attacks and so many crimes that were committed against various indigenous groups. So this is why I say, in order to understand why this is genocide, one needs to look at the totality of conduct and crimes directed at the same group, at the same racial or ethnic or religious or national group as such. And I'm afraid that we are not having enough of this discussion. We are not learning enough from history. So I cannot say that this has not happened, because my feeling is that it has happened, but it's incredibly shocking that it's happening in 2025, that it has happened. And by the way, we should be very, very concerned. We should be aware of the tense we use. This is not past. It's ongoing for the Palestinians. The genocide is not over. It's not that there is no accountability. There is not even action to stop the genocide. Kids in Gaza are still freezing to death. And because Israel has violated hundreds of times the terms of the ceasefire. And now, while this is happening, of course, the Palestinians are blamed, as usual. So Israel has released the prisoners, but then it's rearresting them again. And there is no real action taken to stop Israel. This is what I find absolutely unprecedented in modern or in contemporary history, and needs to lead us to really a sense of awareness that sets in motion something in us. I'm very scared of seeing the normalization of this violence and this brutality against the Palestinian people. But look, as my colleague, the Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Expression, Irene Khan, says, the Gaza crisis has clearly become a global crisis. How many people are being punished for their stance on Palestine? Why? Because we are challenging a system. Israel is part of a system. And now, with the full imperialistic agenda that the new US administration has, what's the system? It's clear. It's old imperialism, as Gramsci and Edward Said had described and conceptualized. The connection between capitalism, imperialism, and colonialism has never been as clear as now. Either we make this conscientization part of our daily life and our sense of the kind of life we want to have, the kind of contribution we want to make throughout our life. The sooner this happens, the better for the system, and the higher the chances that we will be able to make a positive contribution.
Francesca, you said we're not discussing this enough and we're not learning enough, but we have had an extremely rich discussion with you from which we've learned a lot. Thank you very much for sharing your time with long form conversations. We wish you strength and success in the fulfillment of your mandate, and particularly the grace and dignity and power with which you've been fulfilling your responsibilities during the past several years. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much,
Thank you, Mouin.
Francesca. It's been really a pleasure uh, to speak with you extensively and to touch on the personal matters, because it's also important. Sometimes we forget that, you know, that we're also, human beings, and even if things don't bother us in the sense that we don't believe them, we're not what we're being accused of. They do affect people, and that's why I'm assuming people do it, even though I guess the good news is it has less and less effect as time goes by. And
Yeah.
that's one good news. The other good news is that people who are observing people of the sort, especially Israel supporters, whether governmental or otherwise, as people observe those supporters make these accusations of anti Semitism and so on, even those third parties are no longer taking them seriously because they are seeing what's happening on the ground, and they have been, especially now. And I say especially now, frankly, because as Trump has become president, a huge part of the
Democrats have discovered
American
genocide.
population, yeah, they were like, oh my God, there's a genocide. Jesus Christ, it's not a good thing.
Oh,
But also in Europe, I mean, the people who are watching and observing these accusations against so many of us, and I'm sure you and I mean, Mouin and I have had our share as well, they are not taking them seriously. And it's actually important that this is happening, and it actually parallels and shadows the some people say collapse. I don't think it's collapse, but the continuing degradation of Israel's myths from the beginning to the end that it has, disseminated, and that actually is a good development. And I really appreciate that you are able to brush these things off and continue, because you are needed, and we all appreciate and admire what you're doing. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
thank you. Can I say, I know it's not very orthodox because I should be waving my hands and saying goodbye, but I really want to stay with you and Mouin. I'm joking. But I think no, there is something important. So first of all, I'm very touched by what Mouin said, because I've known Mouin for longer than a decade now. And yes, I mean, he's not someone who makes compliments very easily. And I've never received such a generous,
I've never
acknowledgement
said
by
anything nice about
Mouin.
Bassam. You're right.
You never say nice things about most people. And so I'm very touched. I wanted to
Thank you.
note. But no, but there
Well,
is something
it
that
was
Bassam
heartfelt.
said that
Mm.
I want people to reflect upon it. And I hope, can I mention Noura, right? I mentioned Noura again, but again, yeah. Now, I'm not going to say anything Noura Erikat, but I mean, I think of Noura because of one reason. The, we learn from each other. So what I am today is also what I have been, and all the people I've interacted with, and people like Noura or Susan Abul Hawa, or all the people I've engaged with since the beginning of my mandate, the Palestinians, the Israelis, the others, the scholars, the lawyers, the anthropologists. There is a world made of this goodness. We need to cherish. We need to see that. And so it's true that you say we need to look at what happens to us as a people. But honestly, if I look at what has happened to me as a people, this experience, traumatic as it has been, I mean, this mandate, traumatic as it has been, has also been healing, because again, I've been the conduit of so much love and so much support that I wish people could see that, because if they experience the depth of solidarity as I have experienced it, we would move much faster toward the end of this madness. And now I promise
Very
I
well
shut
put.
up.
Mm. It's very well put.
Thank you, Habibti. Thank you so much, Francesca. We'll be in touch, and
Okay,
all power to you.
thank you. And you. Bye bye,
Salam,
everyone.
Bye.
salam. Arrivederci.
That was really a great discussion, Bassam.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I don't know if I overstepped by asking a bit more than I wanted about, than I planned about the personal, but,
No, I think it's good
it's
you did
empowering.
because yeah, and a lot of people have been dealing with similar situations, so it's good to hear from her and how she's dealing with it. And I think a lot of people will take inspiration from that.
Absolutely. Have you been dealing with some of this? I mean, I have been on a weekly basis where, and if there are articles written about like all sorts of interesting fantasies about me, and it's interesting how even people around me that sort of usually would be like, "Hey, look at that! Did you see that?" Like they don't even care about it, even those people who are not necessarily on the same page as I am politically. Like everybody's
Well,
ignoring them.
yeah, I mean, in my case, I've been ignoring them. What I think I don't even respond to them anymore. But what I think I'm going to start doing is when people accuse me of anti-Semitism, maybe responding with something like, when did you first realize you're a pedophile or something like that.
Oh.
It's become so trivial. No one takes it seriously anymore. I mean, anti-Semitism has been redefined as, oh, so you oppose genocide. It's completely absurd, and it's become water off a duck's back. Problem, of course, is that anti-Semitism is a very real thing, and this campaign has given real anti-Semites camouflage.
But they don't
It's
care. That's the thing, my friend. They do not fucking care about the actual anti Semites because the actual anti Semites do not further the cause of Palestine or Palestinians. It's people like us who are exactly opposed to anti Semitism precisely because we're opposed to places like Israel, because of we're opposed to racism. These are the people, we are the people that they
And
care
they're
about.
openly embracing people giving Nazi salutes to huge crowds. They're openly embracing them and
Yep.
and 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 saying, "Oh, this is a Roman salute," or "Don't misunderstand it." It's
And the
incredible.
ADL is so understanding
The
in
DL, the
interpreting.
Defamation League. Yeah.
طيب. Okay, Habibi. So next we are going to, I guess we have a list of people that we're going to speak with,
Yes.
and we'll be back. Yeah. Thanks.
Next month. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, Habibi. Salam.
All right. See you.
Take care.
Bye,
Bye.
Beth.